Welcome everybody, this is another little episode, but today we're celebrating National Sasquatch Day. In order to do that, we are going to talk with Dave McCullough and Jason Lorefice. Which Jason has not been back on to talk about his research in almost 4 years. And we apologize for that, but we will have Jason back on soon, because we definitely want to switch over to another subject that you will learn later on. Now, without further ado, I just wanted to share this story, and then we'll get right on to Dave and end it with Jason. And if you have a story of a possible encounter of a Sasquatch, woodman, wild man, Bigfoot in general, as the popular audience now known as, here is your way to contact me, which is either by hauntedvermont.org and use the contact form there. Otherwise, email us at hauntedvermont802@gmail.com. So my story is basically just short, and it involved an old camping lodge, I guess I could say, maybe house per se, and my dad brought me there once. And what was interesting about this area in West Rutland is that it was like a 2-story little house, cabin thing, and it had a porch, but there was a tree like right out front. And it wasn't just like your ordinary wood tree. It was like one of those type of trees, at the time for me anyway, from what I can recall, was like one of those type of like crab-apple trees, or one of those just trees that you even see like on your sidewalk, basically. It wasn't that tall, it wasn't that thick, it was very slim, as like I just described, where it would be one of those trees that you would find on the center of your town, basically, like on the side of the sidewalk. Now, one thing that caught my attention about this was my dad would always talk about this strange moment where he heard, or maybe have seen, I can't exactly remember, which is like this big silhouette of a creature thing or somebody standing by that tree, almost as tall as this tree. And if you look up the height of these trees that I have mentioned previously, they get about to be 8 to 10 feet tall, which is almost about the exact same size that this thing was. And it's almost like it was peering inside the camp. And it was just so strange, but that's really it. Like, it was just as tall as this tree, about 8 to 10 feet tall, and would just look like it was peering inside, watching. And that was it, but they couldn't make any details of it because it was pitch black out, but they could definitely see that there was like some sort of solid silhouette of something standing right next to the tree before disappearing. Now, if you know what camp I'm talking about, and if this private camp has any members that know what I'm talking about, man, would like to reach out, please reach out. I would love to know if this thing is still there. That's just all I can recall, unfortunately. That's like the only quote Bigfoot story I have in my family that I can think of and remember. Or just private camp in West Rutland. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoy, and remember, happy National Sasquatch Day.
Right there, just see movement right through there.
Welcome everybody to a little chit chat because today is National Sasquatch Day, and here with us is, I guess, Dave, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're basically like an investigator, researcher, and you kind of, tell other people's stories kind of thing, which I guess that kind of makes you like a storyteller in a way. But I met you, this past year for the Whitehall Sasquatch Festival. But before even that, I thought you with Paul Bartholomew at Ski Manor to talk Bigfoot too. You were kind of part of the crowd. But Dave, welcome aboard. How are you?
Hi, Paul. Thank you. Thank you for having me on. I'm
You're
good.
welcome. Good. I'm glad to hear. So real quick, I guess. So how would your time at the Sasquatch Fest anyway? Was it chaotic?
Oh, it was great. It was great. I've gone over the years from actually when they started a really small festival 10 years ago, I want to say.
Yeah, that sounds
And
right.
it's just grown every year. I come back 3 years ago, and I hadn't been since 10 years ago. And I was amazed by how many people went and the number of vendors, food trucks, band playing. I mean, this was full tilt from 10 years ago. I don't even
Right.
think there was 40 or 50 people maybe
Oh my
that long
goodness.
ago. So yeah, it's really leaps and bounds. It's I go to quite a few conferences over the years, and it was one of the bigger crowds that I've seen in
That's
years.
really good. Yeah, that's really good. Yeah. I remember Steve Cole was mentioning there was like over 5,000 people. And when I asked on his post, like how he got the numbers, because I was just curious, he was basically saying it was because of the shuttle. The shuttles were keeping track of how many people were getting on and stuff.
Oh,
So crazy.
interesting.
Yeah. But, yeah. So, Dave, so I guess real quick, like, uh, what kind of got you into this field to begin with, and then I'll let you go into some stories that you have to share for today.
Yeah, I've always had since a young kid, probably 10 years old, watching In Search of Leonard Nimoy and Mysterious Encounters and all these other mystery shows. Just kind of grabbed my attention, and I had an uncle that told me his UFO experience. That really got me interested, like someone I actually knew telling me something, and he was pretty sure about what he saw, and I knew he wasn't just playing around with me, so that got my interest. I was more into that, the Loch Ness Monster, all the oddball fringe interests and mysteries, and Sasquatch too, Bigfoot too. But the film, I've always something about that film. I always said, "Wow, that's tough to be in a guy in a suit." That's like a perfect. If it is, that's the best hoax ever, which I don't think it is. But then in the '90s, reading all the reports on the internet and seeing how much information was out there, because there wasn't a lot of books on it growing up. There was very, very few books. The libraries didn't carry nothing.
No,
So you had to dig for it. And now, then with the internet, it really put a lot of information out there that was, you just didn't know how much was out there. And worldwide, it was really an eye opener. And then to have, I was just reading it so much for a couple of years, several books, thousands of reports, you know, picking through the videos from good videos to bad videos. I knew there was something more to it that I was reading reports on the BFRO and I saw they were having expeditions, and then I seen they had one for New York, Whitehall, New York, and I'm like, I gotta go. This is the closest one to me. I wanted to just get out of the armchair now and get involved, or just go out and look, see what it's like going out on one of these things. And I met a lot of great people, still friends with a lot of people today. And that's what brought me to Whitehall. And that was
that's awesome.
20 years ago this year.
Oh wow.
And so it opened up my eyes to that this is an East Coast phenomenon as well as,
Yep.
I always think it's the Pacific Northwest or the Yeti in the Himalayas but seeing all this credible reports right out of New York State, And then look, the more, like I said, the more information you dig, it's all over New England, all over the country, actually, and around the world, different continents, different similar type creatures. And that became like my East Coast capital of Bigfoot. And like I said, meeting Paul Bartholomew, Steve Culls. I joined the Nezra group back in the day. That was Steve, a lot of other great guys, and just getting my feet wet and coming from, I'm a city kid and never went out in the woods, never went camping, never exposed to it. Like I knew a few kids that were, they were into the scouts, into camping, but I never. I was more of an inner city kid playing baseball, playing all the sports. Never really ventured out into the woods. So until I went to Whitehall and camping, I never had a tent. I never had any camping gear. Didn't know how to camp. Didn't know how to set a tent up, and so that was an eye opener too. And that really gave me a love for the outdoors and nature that I just never opened to before, and I still appreciate it to this day. I'm going out tomorrow with John Wilk, meeting some people, meeting a spot where some people supposedly have seen it. And again, that's always hit or miss, but just getting out in the outdoors, it gives me a reason to get out of the city and drive out into the woods and get away for a couple of days. And really, if you don't see nothing, you had a great time camping, a great time checking out, especially this time of year with the foliage.
Oh yeah.
It just driving out there is a great scenery, and but yeah, that really gave me an interest in being outside. Not, you think this just a subject they're going to read about and watch about, but there was something about it was drawing me to so many people coming forward with this, and so much evidence that is out there that they don't share with people. It's I kind of got the bug that I just want to see one. I don't want to get obviously I ain't gonna have a heart attack over it, or don't. This past June, we had rocks thrown at us in Western Mass. I think they call it escorted out or chased out. Yeah, it worked. I hit the fight or flight. It was just me and another guy, and he stayed calm through the whole thing. But I kind of psyched myself into something happening because the first rock come in the pond, across the pond, and it was very loud and a big splash. And we're in an area where there's no people, there's no property on the other side at all. It's just miles of woods. And it was later at night, and my buddy was whistling, and I just, hey, you shouldn't, kind of joking around, but kind of serious. I was heard from a lot of Native Americans, they teach their kids don't whistle in the woods, especially at night. So about 5 or 10 minutes go by, it got really quiet, and I have a drum with me, and I just did a couple drums. And within a few minutes, the kind of mood changed. It kind of like, I felt like we were being watched and there's something around. I'm like, I don't like the feeling here, Mike, because the first sound that hit the water was definitely not a beaver slapping its tail, because we heard that when we came to the pond. They usually alert each other. They're slapping the water like the people are here. And this was long after we heard the beavers, and this was like a kaploosh. This was not a beaver slap. And I kept saying it to him, like I got a bad feeling. I got a bad if we get a rock any closer to us, I'm out of here. I'm just telling you now. And I had a feeling it was going to. Sure enough, 5 minutes later, one comes right over us from behind us now, and 10 feet into the water, and we were 10 feet off the shore, so it was right between us too, 20 feet away. And I went into, because like I said, I kind of worked myself into, hey, something's got my hairs on the back of my neck, and a lot of people say that you get a feeling, a sixth sense that something's around before something happens, and I was definitely on alert. And my buddy had a night scope, so when the first splash hit, there was nothing in the water. I could see the water rippling, but there wasn't a beaver anyways. I knew it, unless it was a 200-pound beaver doing a cannonball,
Right.
So as soon as it hit, I just, we gotta go, and it was an interesting experience. But that's the most recent for me. And I just got a good friend of ours in Connecticut 2 weeks ago had a rock thrown at him, and it just seems like a lot of that lately. I've heard from other people that if we wanted to, it probably could have. We wouldn't have made it out of there. I always come back to all the people that have made reports and incidents and being scared out. They all live to tell about it. And if they wanted to, they'd just come up from behind you and squash it like a grape. But I think it's just they want you gone. They know no one goes out there. This is far from any camps. Just a really remote pond where people don't really use or go to. It's not recreational, and it's not far from where other incidents have happened with members in Squatchachusetts. So that's the most recent for me.
Oh wow, that's crazy.
Yeah,
Yeah, you hear that a lot too with like the almost like a beaver slap, and then you hear like sort of like it sounded like the rock or boulder. It almost sounded like a boulder with the way you're describing it too. But I mean, at the same time, it's like it kind of makes me wonder because of the area that you're talking about. You would know it better than I would, obviously. But like, is there any type of quote boulders or any type of big rocks around the area?
no, my partner the next morning he took a walk around to that side, and it was just game trails and normal, no excessive size boulders. Just in fact, anything you wanted to throw rocks, you'd have to like kick it out of the dirt or dig it out. There's no, like say like a river or where there's just rocks everywhere. It wasn't like that at all. You
Hmm.
had to dig a rock out, and like I said, it could have been a log. I doubt it was a log though, but it was something big and heavy, like bowling ball size. Because I always described the sound. It was like a
Like a patoosh.
kapoosh. It was,
Yeah.
yeah, it was almost like two sounds where you could something massive hit the water and then the splash. And the other one wasn't as big. It was probably a baseball size, but it was enough to be close to you and happen right there. But I had just said, hey, if we get another one any closer, I'm out of here. And within 5 minutes, we were just sitting there. And before all this happened, I was like, it was very quiet. There wasn't much noise of anything going on, except the beavers when we first come in. But then they were quiet. They just leave or go to their dens or something. And we never heard that again. And so, yeah, that was pretty eye opening because I was actually asked Mike. I was playing on my phone, like, all right, we'll hang out here for a bit, go to camp, get a fire going. One of those nights where just nothing happening. And within minutes, that this he did the whistle, and I goes, "Hey, sure." I was kind of kidding, but not. Natives say don't do that. And then I did the drum, and then I thought better of that afterwards. That they didn't like the drum. That's what he kept saying when we got back to camp. Because I don't think they liked the drum, but it's a deep bass sounding. Kind of you hold it underarm and hit it with a Native American drum, actually.
So that it's kind of like hollowed out. Then, if I'm
Yeah, yeah,
understanding it.
very deep sound that you could kind of hear it going down the pond,
Oh,
echoing. Yeah, it was
yep.
pretty cool.
Hmm. Yeah, that sounds cool. Now, you mentioned an interesting thing too that I just want to get back to, which is the sound. So I'm assuming before it went quiet, you could actually hear like I'm just trying to think cricket, bird, not maybe not birds at nighttime, but more like crickets because you hear crickets at night, maybe frogs, even like nocturnal type creatures. But when you start saying it went quiet, do you mean like the woods itself went quiet?
Yeah, yeah, it was kind of when we come in, it was normal. Like I said, the beavers, you can have, typical forest sounds, but it didn't take long. And I said, I goes, wow, it's really quiet now. For the third week of June, it should be very active. It's spring going into summer. It just didn't sound right. I'm like, wow, there's nothing. No owls, no nighttime sounds, which is weird.
Mm-hmm.
And so it did have kind of a weird vibe before all this.
Wow.
And we're actually going back out there soon to do before it gets too cold. Because I think they move around. I don't think they're in the same spots all the time. Because some spots we've went to where stuff has happened and then there's nothing. Other spots, you get a report a few miles away a couple days later. So I think that's how they stay. They don't stay in one spot for too long. And they
Right.
just, all the forests are all connected. So they could be in Central Mass one night and couple days they're out in Western Mass. I think this is just my opinion only. That's no proof of that, but I think they do. I think there'd be more dwellings or structures that if they made these things to survive the winters, there could be caves. There's hidden caves, and I would think the way they can rip trees down and move brush, they could cover up a cave entrance easily in the winter and just come in and out when they want. And the storms get too much, crawl back in, and we'd probably never even see them. I'm sure there's areas where people just don't go. Swamps, a lot of swamps. People just, unless you're hunting or doing something like that, but swamps are generally a place where not a lot of people go,
No,
unless they are looking for these or other critters, you know.
right. Yeah, yeah. I mean, as much as I am into the subject, but not like on the boots yet. But kind of like what you just said, I also feel that as the weather changes, you're right. They don't stay in one area. They got to move because what's the word I'm looking for? The plantation of what was growing at the time is probably dying out for the season kind of thing. So now what would have been their food source is now declining because of it getting colder and the freeze and all that. So yeah, so it does make sense that they would need to move closer. Even maybe that's why you hear sometimes they come into other people's areas to maybe dig through the trash or something and whatever else, just to make sure they can even get a bite to eat, per se, I guess.
Right. Opportunists, yeah, I agree. That's Vermont, especially Vermont, New Hampshire, Western Mass, and tons of farms. New York,
Yeah.
Farm after farm, orchards. There's a great video from Vermont. It was under the apple tree, a game camera.
Oh, yeah. Frank,
And
yeah.
I think they know where all these spots are. And like I said, they don't. But again, anything I come up with is all my opinion. That's all it is, and no facts to any of it. But like I said, it's from 20 years of digging into it. It's for what it's worth. It's just an opinion, but it's just loaded with, and they're not going to wear out one area where everything's picked clean, then move on. I think they get what they need for a day or two, move along. Not just farms and vegetables and fruits, but deer. They've been known to take deer out, and I think in the winter too more. That could be even more prevalent, and that's what they need more because the farms are all picked out and frozen.
Yep.
And it just an opinion, but plants too. Plants. There's a lot of edible food out in the woods. But I think deer is a staple, especially as it gets colder.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that would make sense that, if they were to migrate, and this is just an example in my own opinion for those listening too, is like if they are moving from the northeastern sometimes to maybe, let's just say, more west because of it getting warmer, maybe that's why some areas spike up with sightings versus around here, maybe. And I'm saying that as Vermont because I don't really, as far as I'm aware, I don't really know that many sightings around wintertime for us, except for maybe around the end of August to October, really, right before the November month. But then I do have heard that there is some sort of sightings around November and December, but it's very rare, I'll say. So it makes me wonder if they're going more toward the warmer climate, just because of maybe the food source of being able to provide for the next whatever month you want to call it for winter, because as you know, Dave, you never know what to expect anymore with the East Coast with winter time.
Oh, I know. Yeah, I was supposed to get a good one this winter, but I think too. But then you think that the sightings in all the cold weather states very active. Alaska, Canada is one of the most active. British Columbia, where it's
Yep.
very cold zones. Look at the Yeti up in Mount Everest, up in the 0 degree.
Mm.
Russia, the Russian Almasty. So it doesn't affect them physically, the cold, but food wise, it has to, because if they're gonna follow the critters, the food chain's gonna move wherever the food is. And a lot of people, there was a good researcher in Colorado noticed that the majority of sightings in higher ground, uh, till the winter, the deer come down, and deer and other animals come down off the mountain, and they think that's why there's more sightings then. But in the good weather, they're going to go up. It's all conjecture, but it seems that way in all these areas.
Well, that makes sense. I just recently listened to a podcast where the guy was talking about he was out hunting or hiking, probably hunting, I think, if I remember the story. He was talking about how he went up to the top of this hill and he found like some dead rabbits, almost as if they were getting prepared for the winter time. Probably because they say the higher the climate, the higher the atmosphere or climate, the colder it's going to be. So maybe what he found was possibly, whatever it was, and I don't know. And I'm just saying that because I don't know if he really did happen to stumble across something like a Bigfoot that would be preparing him for the winter. But I mean, that would make sense. Almost try to find like a cave or something. I'll just say for the example where they're kind of using it as a refrigerator, freezer to kind of store it that way. So that way they at least have something during the winter time.
Right.
So I
I've,
could see
I've
that.
heard stories about that also, about them packing stuff into like snow piles or snow drifts, basically using it like a cooler or refrigerator. I have
Right.
heard a few accounts of that.
That's interesting. Maybe. Maybe
Right.
that's the. Yeah, I mean, it would make sense because how else would they be? I mean, well, I mean, I guess Dave, you would know more than I would in this case, but like, when it comes to like the wintertime with snow, you would think you would be able to find their footprints a lot, but then you hear accounts where they almost act like they're floating. They're not even, do I dare say, like touch the ground per se, because they just look like they're floating. So I
Right.
mean, how could you not misidentify a footprint in that nature? I guess is what I'm trying to get at, because I remember one time somebody had sent me a photo, and because of me not with the trained eye, I couldn't have told you that it was a bear track, you know. And for me, it could have been anything, It could have been a Sasquatch, could have been a bear, it could have been, whatever. But it just looked weird. But you know, when you start having other people, especially hunters, tell you this is what you're looking for like a bear track, especially in snow, then when you actually see it more, it's like, oh, okay, that makes sense. But for somebody like me that doesn't have that trained eye, and then you get people saying, "Rrr, rrr, 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 you're so stupid," blah blah blah. It's like, well, how the hell am I supposed to learn?
Right. 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 A lot of things are a lot of the track lines from Bigfoots have been seen in the snow, and they're in a perfectly straight line, which is how you can tell the difference from a bear or from a human. We walk kind of side to side ourselves.
Right.
Excuse me. And bear, a lot of times their rear paw will step into their front paw, but you can tell it's quadrupedal, and you can tell it's not straight in a line like a Bigfoot.
Right.
And
Right.
those have been found in the winter too, so that tells you they don't. I don't think the cold affects them physically. It's
Right.
just more affects the food source, and that's why they might have to move, or why they're not as active in the winter. Um, I mean, look at bears; they disappear. A lot of animals just burrow themselves, and
Hibernate. Yeah.
yeah, their bodies are made to withstand almost going to sleep for the winter. You know, like literally. But
Yeah.
I don't think they have that at all, because there's tons of sightings in, like I said, cold areas, northern hemisphere, all around the world. There's all winter stuff, and I don't think that affects them. They think they get a fat, really insulated skin where they can hold the heat in, and a lot of animals, even deers aren't very overly furry or hairy, but they survive the winter. A lot of animals around here still in the winter. We
Hmm.
see tracks, so I'm right through year round.
So, and I'm just curious for your own opinion. So, how do I want to word this before we get into your stories? Because I'd like to have you share those stories too, but I'm also curious of your opinion at your same time, which is, so you hear on one side, I'll just put it as like one side, this side thing. Um, One side they say, because they don't know, just like me, like I will not say I'm an like I don't know that much about this subject. That's why I talk to people like you, because that's how I learn. Uh, I like I tell a lot of people, do you want me to talk about like the paranormal aspect, ghost spirits? I know more about that because of my own experiences with that versus something like this. But anyway, so what I would like to ask for the example with your own opinion is, so one side is they believe that they're made out of hair, which is why they don't shed as much, versus the other side where they think it's more fur, but that's why sometimes you see pieces of hair. So, what's your thought on the whole? Do you think these creatures have hair or fur?
I think they do. I think it's hair by the descriptions. There's been hair samples turned in, and caught on a fence or something like that, a tree. Lot of that, but a lot of descriptions, especially in the face. They could see part through it, but then it looked like more like a very thick. Um, I've heard them say, yeah, it had hair on its face, but it was very thin. I could see the cheeks and the skin on the face, but it was like a kind of like a straggly something that's never been shaved. But
Oh, yep.
as a rule, yeah, I mean, most descriptions it was very hairy, hair all over its body, or but a lot of them too. If you look at the Patterson film, there's hair all over, but certain areas of the back and the body, you can see the muscles, but you can see the hair on it too, where it's not overly thick enough that enough where people say it wasn't a human. It had too much hair all over it, but enough to see the muscles, enough to see the body itself through the hair. And the Patterson film's a good example of that, because you can tell it's hair all over, but certain areas it just looks like especially a lot of people that have gotten a look at the face up at a decent distance, and they'll say,
Mhm.
"Oh, it was more human than animal than it was." Wasn't a hairy ape. The hairy ape theory is, I think, it's harder and harder to say it's an ape or an undiscovered ape, which a lot of people lean to. That's the big difference in groups of believers that it's just a flesh and blood animal, hasn't been caught yet. I kind of started out on that train, but I'm more in the group now that there's so many people have said, no, it was more human, that someone that had a good look at it, like a hunter through his scope, we zeroed right in on the face and said, I couldn't shoot. This thing was like either a guy in a suit, but it was some type of man. It was,
Yep.
is it a hermit
I didn't
out
want
there?
to. Yeah, I didn't want to shoot a human. Yeah, that's what you
Right.
hear a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard that a lot. A lot of hunters, a lot of people that have gotten good looks at it with binoculars that it hasn't seen them yet. So they've been able to look at it for, 5 or 10 minutes and get a really good look at it. And not only does it walk like a man, it looks like a man in a lot of features, but definitely too big, too wild looking, too hairy, where they can say, all right, that's not a man, but it's not an animal either, but it's somewhere in the middle there. I think it's a type of hybrid that, if you look at our fingerprints and our dermal ridges, these have the same things, but they're not in the same direction. It's its own species. It's totally opposite of a human, but it is human-like in dermal ridges, aspects and
Right.
features.
Yeah, I don't have the image pulled up, but now that you just kind of say that, so one thing that I liked, going back to the Whitehall Fest for a minute, but you on your table you had this amazing cast. It was probably a replica for all I know, but man, I can't think of the cast name. But anyway, I think it was that 13-inch handprint that you had.
Yep. Yep.
Uh, not gonna lie. I mean, I've probably seen a lot more obviously footprint cast than handprint. So when I saw this 13-inch monster handprint, man, like I actually had to ask you, like, which way is it? Like, is it like the hand facing down like this for the example here, Dave, or like is it like he placed it on the ground per se? So can you just talk to us about that for a minute? Because that was so interesting.
Yeah, that's one of my. That is a replica. You're right. That's a replica of a handprint from Washington State, from the famous researcher Paul Freeman. There's a famous film. He also got video of it, but he is, in my opinion, is the most underrated or less talked about researcher that has come up with uh, dozens of casts, literally. The handprints, two different handprints, a knuckle print, several ankle prints, the knee prints. These are all from the same area coming up. It was coming up out of a muddy bank, out of
Oh wow.
a water spring. And there's another handprint. It's probably half the size of that one, but that is like at these things that people go to, or displays or museums. There are a lot of footprints. There's Jeff Meldrum had over 300. Cliff
Oh yeah.
Barrettman probably the same. So there's hundreds of legit casts out there that people have an interest in. But I noticed a lot of people in Whitehall that weren't coming to my table, but they do a double take at the hand. And I say, oh, I've seen tons of footprints, but I've never seen a handprint. So that when I bring that one out, that's a big draw for people coming over and looking, because, like I said, you see a lot of footprints. You're seeing there's dozens of those, but I'm pretty. I like that one. I had to have that one. I seen the I was buying them off Dr. Jeff Meldrum a long time ago, actually, and he was like, "Oh, I got go on my site. You'll see what other ones." And I saw the handprint, and I asked him, and it cost a little more to ship it because it was so heavy.
Oh
But
yeah, I
I'm
believe
so
it.
glad I got that one now. Now that I have it, but
Oh yeah.
yeah, you could tell this thing. If this thing grabbed a deer or anything,
Oh, it was
it'd be
done for,
like us.
man.
It'd be like us grabbing an egg in our hand, or a grape. But yeah, that's massive. And I usually a lot of kids. or women will take a picture of it, and it covers their whole torso basically when they're
Oh my
holding it.
god.
And a lot of people take a picture with that one. But yeah, that's I want to say 1992, 93, Walla Walla, Washington.
That's crazy, man. Yeah. I remember I had to do like a double take myself with that just because, like I was saying, I'm used to seeing the footprint more, unfortunately, and stuff like that. 1986 in the Blue Mountains in the Washington Oregon border. Trying to figure out if there's anything else. Was it 9-inch across the widest part of the palm? Oh yeah, yeah. They measure 9-inch across the widest part of the palm, and the hand is almost 13-inch long, including the third digit. Yeah. So again, it's crazy. And then down below, it sounds like this 13-inch handprint was also part of 17-inch track that was associated with it, if I'm reading this right. So, I mean, that's a big boy then, or a girl, because, I
Right.
mean, well, that actually brings up an interesting point. So, Dave, have we gotten to the point where we could look at, like, let's just say a handprint or footprint and determine what is a male and a female yet of these things, or have we not gotten that far? I'm just curious more.
Right. I've never heard of anything about hands, but there's another famous print from the same area. It's called the butt print, a butt cast. And it's on the hill where these things were. It had to have been a group of them. And it can clearly tell it's a female. That is the only cast that I know of. I mean, we got ideas. The Patterson film is obviously a female. So the tracks along there that they got, they can figure out the length of the foot, female, 7.5 feet. So anything bigger, I would put as a male, like 18, 19 inches have been found, 20, 21 on extreme, on the far end of the spectrum. But that's got to be 9 or 10 feet. I think as the foot gets bigger, obviously I think the body gets bigger and the
Right.
animal gets bigger or creature, whatever
Mm-hmm.
whatever it is.
Yeah, that it just boggled my brain. That's for sure. But I know I was just curious. But that makes sense that you say that anything bigger than like a 7.5 would be considered. Well, you would think would be considered a male. I mean, that does make sense. But then again, if we also look at a different animal species, and this is just for the example here, but like spiders, a female spider is bigger than a male spider, and as we know, once they mate, the female kills the male. So I mean,
Yeah,
um, so I guess that's why it kind of fascinates me, and that's kind of why, ironically, I wanted to ask if we kind of gotten that far yet, just because I mean, what, like, who is bigger in the end?
right. Right. No, it's a good question. It could be more narrow. Male might be more robust and a wider being, that wider foot. Because
Mm-hmm.
there's cast from Roger Patterson also from the area of the film site, but it's totally different foot. It's a lot wider and a couple inches longer, actually, which they always joke that this could be Patty's mate or Patty's husband. But it's interesting, the same area. In the
Mm-hmm.
film itself, there's no doubt about it, it's a female. There was no
Right.
question about that. So we know that was 7 to 7.5 and
Oh, feet
15
high.
inch.
Yeah.
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 So
Yeah.
these
Huge.
were 17.5 to 18.
That's
It's got to
crazy.
be an 8 or 9 footer. It's got to be the male. They're a lot wider of a foot. But yeah, I would agree with that.
Right. Yeah. And I'll add this: like when you actually see Patty in that film, I don't know. It's probably been mentioned a few times, but I've noticed she's pretty. At least to me, it looks like she's pretty groomed. I think that a lot of people have mentioned that before too, but she does. She really does. But to also quote you about you can tell Patty's a female is yeah. I mean, for those that may not have seen it, I guess because we are in a new generation where now people are becoming more into it now, probably because of all the shows and people are more comfortable to talk about it now, kind of like with the whole UFO stuff. Now that it's being talked about now, it's almost like becoming the new norm, obviously. But I guess what I'm getting at too is, yeah, for those that may want to check it out, and you can tell she has breasts. I'm just gonna say that's how you know she's a female,
Yeah.
basically. So, but yeah,
Yeah, especially now with the new enhancements they have, they can zoom in on. They'll take that section alone and put it in a box and zoom it in, and you can see the breasts bouncing into each other, bouncing off. They didn't have costumes in 1967 that could do that, and someone is coming up with a hoax in a suit. They were pretty clever to say, hey, let's make this a female with realistic breasts, and yeah, let's go all up. You know what I mean? It's just unbelievable that
yeah,
someone could do that back then. I think it's impossible.
I think it's impossible, especially for what there was for a costume back in the day. So I will agree with that it would be impossible compared to today,
Yeah,
especially the realistic muscles. Like we
yeah,
can't forget that can't be done in costume. I don't even think we can still do that in
right,
costume today. So
right.
I mean,
There's been a lot of Hollywood special effects guys that there's no way that could have been done in 1967. They didn't have stretch fur. They didn't have, like you said, you could see all the muscles moving and as they should. Just there's no way it could have been a costume.
no, no.
You know.
But yeah, so I guess Dave, so you have some stories that you would like to share before we'll wrap this up, because I don't want to take any more time, obviously, of you for already giving the generous time that you are allowing anyway. But yeah, so what stories do you have to share?
Mostly just sighting reports. Like I said, I want to see one myself. My experience, the most recent, the rocks thrown at us. We've had two incidents where trees have been broken, like smaller trees, saplings, not a huge tree, but shaken, snapped, and slammed on the ground. That's been twice. That was the most recent was 2019, and we had therms on it right where it went down. Not I don't know, 50 yards from us, pretty close, and we got therms right on it. Nothing. That's the mind-boggling, baffling. Something just pushed this tree over, and there's nothing there. That's what's baffling us. That what happened to it? Did it go into an orb and just because we've seen a lot of orbs? Like you can't say it was, but you can't say it wasn't. But what I always say is on certain things, vocalizations, trees coming down, you can rule out what it wasn't. You can't really say what did it, but you can definitely say what didn't do it because there was nothing there to say, oh, that's what it was. You know what I'm saying? There's no heat signature. Um, People have heard that stuff happen, then hear something running through the woods taking off. Okay, something physical did that.
Like a
Uh,
freight train running through the
right,
woods.
right.
Yep,
That's
yep.
exactly how people have described it. It sounded like a freight train or a bull running through the woods,
Yeah.
And that's happened where people have reported that, and it comes all the way down the hill to their camp, and then there's nothing.
Which mind boggles me, because if you can hear, like, I guess from what I've heard too, Dave, I know you have something similar, but like you hear something where it's gonna, I guess I could say it's like a bluff charge. They know it's coming right at them, but then it stopped, and it's like, where is it? It's like,
right,
why can't they see it when they know it was coming right at them? That
right,
just boggles me. So, but then you start to hear. I guess maybe I could throw it in, because maybe this could be what they're doing, but I don't know. But maybe they're getting down into what people now call it the spider crawl. So are they just that low to the ground? So maybe they are camouflaging I guess, themselves within the ground, so that's why we can't see them, because we're not looking down?
Well, we looked up and down. There was nothing at all. But I know a lot of people that have described the spider crawl, and so I know they do that, and they're capable of that. And that site where the handprints are from, they assumed it was a spider crawl up the bank because there was handprints and footprints. So they think it might have just spread up the hill. And I've read that in a lot of reports that they're as fast on all fours as they're as fast on two legs, which is pretty creepy. Like a lot of people have described it, wasn't the physical appearance, but it scared me more how fast they moved. Um, there's been reports people running along the side of the car on a country road and looking in the window. And there's been several of those on highways. So that's another whole. How can they crash through the woods? Then there's nothing. And then other people have had them walk right into camp and not hurt a twig. So they can be stealthy, silent, or they can cause a ruckus. Why? That's the big question: is why do sometimes they come down like a bulldozer, knocking trees over, and then they don't do nothing, and other times they'll walk right into camp and you didn't hear a sound, and they got no lights. They see it the dark, and they don't step on a twig. It's just baffling how they can go from one extreme to the other and sneak right up on you. You don't need them standing right there. I had a good friend in Georgia tell me that he was out all day and night on the game trails, looking here, looking there, everywhere. And he's falling asleep at the fire, having a drink, and he heard a twig snap, and he looked over, and it was 10 feet away, right out in the open, just staring at him. Like, hey, I'm right here, looking for me? And it's baffling how they can be like ninjas and walk right up to you, or they can cause a ruckus and scare you the hell out of that. So I don't think it's an accident when they leave and they're knocking trees over. I think it's by choice that, that's their way. I want them gone, or I'm going to scare them so bad they ain't coming back here. Or, it just adds to the mystery. It's just baffling, really.
The only thing I'll just comment to that is maybe the one that seemed ruckus. I think that's the word I want to use when it comes to camp, and I'll use the camping for this example, which is like the juveniles because they're curious. But then maybe you got mom or pop, they're both kind of like being like, "Hey, you're being too loud," or and maybe that could be what's going on. Is just that the kid is the juvenile is more curious because it's kind of like our own kid. They get, as they grow up, they get curious because they might not have seen a campfire before. They're smelling something new. They're seeing tent. They don't know what this is. Why are there people here just like camping out? With to them, who knows what they're really thinking of when it comes to that aspect. So I don't know. But what was I going to say too? Oh yeah, in that episode too, they were talking about how they found it fascinating that when they could hear this thing kind of going through their cooler, they threw out like the raw hot dog, but they took their raw steak. So that's kind of interesting how they won't eat the hot dogs, but they'll take the raw steak.
Right.
So I don't know if you heard anything about that.
I not about the steak and the hot dogs, but of taking certain things and leaving other things.
Yes.
I heard a few stories about that, and I have heard from some actually not the guy with the apple tree, but a very similar situation. There was a guy in New Hampshire that had pear trees, and he was getting them raided. And one summer this was when we were up there a handful of years ago. Him and his wife were out in a summer night, and all they could smell were the pears. And they were like, wow, those are ready. Why don't you come out tomorrow and pick them all? Not a big tree, but it had a fence around it, a 6-foot fence, so deer can't get into and other animals really can't get to it.
Yep.
And they were all picked clean. And he was saying it's only, I think it was in the fall before the fall harvest. And the next day he went out, the tree was empty. He goes, it was the night after me and my wife were saying, oh, I can't wait to have some pears. And the next day they come out, they were all gone. But other people have said that have farms, I've read a lot that they don't take it all. They always leave something for the people so they don't, you know what I mean? We'll take what we
Yep.
need, but we're going to leave you some too. So
Yeah, they're being
that's all.
generous.
Yeah, right. We're not going to take it all off you, but we'll leave you some.
Hey, I mean, I wish they know manners sometimes.
Right.
All right, Dave. Well, is there anything else that you would like to share, or is that it for now, buddy?
That's it for now. I'm gonna go out tomorrow and try again. Just take a walk. Like I say, even if for me now it's I don't really have nothing to prove to anyone else. I don't need to find evidence. It'd be nice. I've never seen a footprint in the ground at all of anything other than a boot or a human. I don't expect to. I've had some screams. I've had trees broken. I had the rocks thrown at me this year. So I don't really need, after all these years of doing it, it's like I don't need to prove it to anyone else now. I kind of just want to see it, and which I've always said, I just want to see one. But hopefully that comes up, that happens, and I can just enjoy it. And even if nothing happens, it's a night out in the woods, or it's a nice walk in the woods. I take it for what it is. If you do, great. Chances are not, because most people looking and out looking don't have sightings. Other people, they see it by accident, or they, taking a ride at an odd hour of the night to the store and it crosses the road. There it is. When other people are, a lot of the researchers I know, most researchers, former skeptics. So they say, hang in there, you'll see one. The more you put yourself out there, it's just like playing the lottery, buying the winning ticket.
Totally.
It's like, hey, you might see one tonight. You might. Chances are you won't. But there's that one chance. Like the old joke is. So you're telling me there's a chance, right?
That's right, Dave. Well, Dave, I appreciate your time and I love your stories, and best of luck to have your own actual sighting, man. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Paul. Great
You're
talking
welcome.
here, and thank you for having me on.
No problem. We'll have to talk again in a different aspect, I guess. But thank you nonetheless.
Right, I'll be out. They already asked me to do Whitehall next year, so I'll be up there next year. Looking forward to it.
I'll see you next year then.
Well, maybe not before then. We'll get together for something, but if not, see you again.
Yeah, for sure, man. Keep me posted. Do you do stuff around Bennington? I'm trying to remember now.
We have been up there a couple times. Bennington, Vermont is. We actually did an expedition there with the Nesra group. Some interesting, nothing concrete, nothing come out of it. But again, back then I was just learning the ropes and learning how to camp.
The Boy Scout, man.
Right.
That's kind of funny because I used to be out in the woods when I was little. So like that was me. And then as I got older, we kind of moved to the city, unfortunately, and I don't like it. I miss having woods around me, dude.
Yeah. I like going out there just for that couple days out of the city, and then it's always the ride back. We're like,
I don't wanna. Welcome everybody to another little segment for the National Sasquatch Day, and today have my partner in crime from the last time we actually talked to this returning guest, Alan, welcome back. And
Thank you.
yeah, you're welcome. It's always a honor to have you on to discuss this anyway. So, returning guest is author, investigator, and just everything else, crypto kind of, more Bigfoot, but we can get into that. But Jason Lorefice, welcome back.
Well, thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. I mean, I know like almost 4 years ago to the date, we kind of said we were going to have you on for part two, and here we are 4 years later. It kind of took longer than expected, but that's just the way of life, I think. But
Well, it's just part of the hurdles in life.
yeah, that's right. And I mean, but exciting news is last time we're talking about your first book and some other little segues, but right now we have your second book to talk about, and it's Mountain Giants of the Adirondack that Into the Fray Publishing had nicely put out for you. So I guess for those, Jason, real quick, that may not have had a chance to, you know, hear the first episode with you, can you just kind of briefly just tell us like what kind of got you into the subject of Bigfoot?
Well, as a kid, I always had an interest. I grew up watching shows like In Search of and Unsolved Mysteries, and once in a while you'd see a documentary popping up on the subject of Bigfoot, but they were more few and far between. So I was always aware of the situation that these things did exist. I always had an interest in it, but I didn't really see myself investigating, going out into the woods looking for them, or let alone writing a book on one, until I moved to Vermont in the early 2000s, and I started noticing some activity, and I got a hold of Joe Citro. I discovered him early 2005, 2006, and I started reading some of his books, and I took an interest, and I started slowly but gradually started getting my feet wet, getting into the water, and started looking into some of the reports and some of the incidents, and I started examining some of the evidence, and one thing led to another, and eventually I started meeting more and more eyewitnesses, and in 2014 I decided to start working on a book. By that time I've had over 5 years of research and evidence, so I compiled everything into a book, and one book led to a second book, and I'm meeting more and more. So far I've met several dozen people just in New England alone, and these are face-to-face people, not just emails, that I have discovered that these people actually had some sort of encounter or an experience. And I realize a lot of people believe that the topic of Bigfoot only exists out in the Pacific Northwest, but no, they are very prominent here in New England and New York too. So it's mostly an East Coast thing that we're seeing, and we're seeing it in Pennsylvania, we're seeing it in Virginia, in Ohio, in upstate New York, in Maine, even in some parts of western Massachusetts, and Vermont and New Hampshire as well. So it's a global phenomenon, and like someone else said, it's right here in our backyard.
Right. And speaking of backyard, so when it came to, I guess, researching for your second book, The Mountain Giants of the Adirondack, I guess, what kind of drew you to that area to make you want to talk about the Adirondack? Was it just because of, just like from the beginning of that title, that mountain giant, because of all the giant skeletons that have been found throughout the Northeast, or was it just because of the landscape of like the mountain regions? I guess, like, what made you, I guess, want to look into it more?
First, when I first started hearing about sightings in Whitehall, that was the famous Abear Road incident in 1976 with Officer Brian Goslin. That led to eventually the Bigfoot festivals that they have every year, and that festival alone started to branch out, and more people started coming in from out of state, and more people that come and go to these festivals, the more people you come in contact with that had some sort of an experience. And eventually I discovered, well, there's a lot more sightings out west here in the western part of the state and in the north part of the state, as far as, because me being in Vermont, I was mostly focused in Vermont, but New York has way more sightings and a lot more reports. And I just thought that it would be more prominent to look into the New York upstate Adirondack area, because there's a lot more evidence out there and there's a lot more people to talk to as far as eyewitnesses. So that would be a definitely gold mine for a for that type of topic.
Right, and you kind of see that with within your book. You have like a nice little map that kind of I don't want to say cluttered, but you basically were pinpointing, I think would be the best way of like where I'm assuming the eyewitnesses reports are from what you have combed together to kind of make it noticeable, I guess, with that book, because you have like the New York State map, and then you kind of have like the Bigfoot symbol icon in there to kind of help signify, I'm assuming, the site. And it looked like, and I could be wrong, Jason, but I think you were noticing, I think you worded it as like maybe a similarity or something, as far as like there's more sightings in the northeast, maybe on the border between Vermont and New York, I think it was.
Yeah, the map that I had in the book had those little, shall we say, like little pinpoints on the map. Those are what you would call hotspots or clusters, and what I refer to as a cluster is an area or a geographic location that has three or more reports in that general area, indicating that this is a hotspot. This could be a possible migration trail for these creatures that pass through on a seasonal basis. So these are definitely points of interest that I look into, and I emphasize that in the book, that these areas are hotspots where people have had reported activity.
Right. Yeah, I see there's a lot of clutters around Saratoga, that Washington County, and then whatever other counties, unfortunately, Franklin maybe.
Yeah, there's Franklin County, Washington County, Warren County, and a few others. But that was mostly, my focus was on the eastern part of the Adirondacks.
Right.
The western part is, there's this, it's harder to access as far as miles, because the further west you go, the more you get out into just, no man's land, and no cell service, no gas stations for 20 miles away. It's really tough to investigate some areas like that when you have to plan ahead as far as travel. I mean, I've been out there a couple of times. The further west you go, I mean, I spent 8 hours just driving alone just to get to the western part of the state. So that wound up turning up to be empty, and I haven't met any people out there in that area that were willing to talk to me, because most of the people, the further into the sticks you go, the more secluded they want to be, the more introverted they are, and I get it. They move out there because they don't want to deal with the public, and all well and good. But the majority of the people that are willing to talk about these kind of things generally live closer to civilizations, and they're more willing to say, hey, this is what I saw, this is what happened to us. And so those are the people that I really find myself talking to in the long run.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, I guess, because I know Warren County pretty good when it comes to New York, obviously, because of like Glen Falls area and everything else, but would you, I'm trying to figure out if this would be the appropriate term maybe, but so there was a part where one of the things you were noticing when you were kind of compiling your data was during the month of, I think it was May to June, or maybe June, July. You can correct me afterward, but you started to notice there was more sightings around that time frame, and then by summer came, it was like the sighting stopped, and then by September, October, getting into the colder time, right before winter is gonna, hit, that's when the sightings pick up again. Now, it's interesting because would you say, at least from what you've heard from your testimony, and maybe I'm just looking at it not in the right way, but is it safe to say, as far as when it comes to the beginning of the year, they're mainly around that Adirondack area because obviously the plantation and stuff is growing for the summertime, whereas they're maybe starting to just pick what they need to then let it grow for the next, let's just say, 3 months. And then once September rolled around into October, they're almost, do I want to say, come back again to maybe pick off a little bit to get ready for the winter season, or is that time frame, fall to winter, is that when they're maybe coming like into places like Warren County where it's not really so heavily wooded, I guess I would say, because depending on where you are in Warren County, it's more like a city, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yes, I know exactly what you're talking about. So in the area that you were referring to, it's mostly the Whitehall area, and then you got Fort Anne, and then you got Ticonderoga, and then on the eastern side into the Vermont area, we have areas such as Sudney, Pulteney, Fairhaven, West Haven, Castleton, West Rutland, that whole general graphic vicinity area. What we're seeing is we get reports around April, May area, kind of in that area, depending on the season, depending on the weather, because every year varies. We get reports of activity, and it runs the gamut from sightings to sounds to people's trash getting knocked over, you name it. And then things start to calm down around June, July, and into early August. And this is what I think is happening, is that they're coming through, and they're coming out of a seasonal time of the year where vegetation is just starting to grow in the season of in May and June. So things start to calm down, is because I think they're further deeper into the woods where they're actually foraging off of the wildlife, the plants, the vegetation, and such. Now, when we get into the later time into the end of the summer, say around early September, October, November, that's when the wildlife and the vegetation starts to die off. And that's when we start getting more reports. We start seeing people getting reports on them going through their dumpster, stealing their trash, stealing their livestock. And I seem to think that because the vegetation is starting to die off for the season, now they're foraging for food and they're getting more desperate. So they're coming into our backyards and into our domain. So they're running the risk of being seen and spotted again. So obviously there's a migration pattern taking place where they pass through these areas in the early parts of late spring, early summer, and then they disappear because they've already left the area. And then into the late summer, early fall, now they're coming back into that area. And it's now, because that October, November, we have pretty much no more vegetation, I think they're more forced to live off of livestock, deer, animals. You got small animals, you got squirrels, you got raccoons, and so forth. And then they disappear for the season. Now, I don't think that they're hibernating. I think they're just moving up into higher elevations where they're following the deer migration. And again, things go quiet for the rest of the winter, and then the next year, the cycle repeats itself.
Right. And I just wanted to add one thing that I've recently heard before, if Alan wants to shine in on anything, which is one of the things I kind of just heard recently, is, and you just kind of brought it up, the higher elevation. As we know, when it starts getting colder out, the higher elevation you go, it's going to get more colder, obviously, because the higher you go, the colder it gets, warmer it gets, whatever, whatever the season is. So I guess when it comes to like the smaller animal that you were just also detailing is like rabbit. I just recently heard about a hiker somewhere. This is on a different podcast, but I just want to share it here, which is he stumbled upon like how did he describe it? Almost like a freezer type thing on top of a hill, which had two corpses of like two dead rabbits to kind of keep them frozen for maybe the winter time. I don't know if I would say to store it, but would something like a Sasquatch or a wild man, depending on who you're talking to, would you say that they would be trying to grab these small animals to to basically stack up for as the winter months progress, they at least can still have food? Not in a way of hibernating, obviously, but just a way so they don't have to travel far.
I've heard that before, and I've heard not only was it used with rabbits, but actually raccoons. One explorer found 3 different dead raccoons that were stuck inside a snowbank with its tail sticking out, and for the life of him, he couldn't figure out who did that because he didn't find any footprints in the area. I think that's because probably they've already had a couple of snowstorms covering up the tracks, and whatever stuffed them into the snow was probably a couple of days prior to that. But it has been known that they've used the cold winter months to preserve their food, which would make perfect sense for them to do something like that, especially in the wintertime when food and wildlife is scarce. You want to try and conserve as much as you can. So yeah, that would make sense.
Yeah, I've spoken to researchers who are in a specific. I don't want to give away the area of the site itself, but they were finding seeds, certain seeds of fruits and vegetation that was not growing at the time in certain scat that they've been tracking a certain group that they felt very strongly. They had tracks. They had a lot of evidence for this group inhabiting a certain area, and they were finding seeds and certain evidence of different fruit and vegetation that was not growing, was completely out of season. So they were feeling strongly that they had to have some way of storing these things, and it was very interesting. So it does sound possible, and again, you're very close, especially in that area. You get in the Adirondacks, and it's very, very easy to move into. You're right there on the border of Canada and other. There's a lot of areas where, and of course they can. I do think these things probably migrate a lot. So it would make sense. It would make a lot of sense that there's some way to.
And, let me just say, as a researcher, whoever these individuals were that made that discovery, I would hope that they were documenting as to what particular type of seeds they found that were being stored in that area, because that will give you a clear indication on the diet of this individual or these individuals as to what their migration is, what their diet is, and that those little pieces of detail are key elements into your work and research, because their diet alone will tell a big story.
Oh no, absolutely. These guys they document everything. I believe they were pawpaw seeds that they were talking about finding. At least I remember that was one of the things they were talking about. But pawpaw seeds were brought up quite a bit.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, and you would definitely want to conserve something like that into wintertime when food gets scarce. Your calorie consumption is going to be a lot lower than it would be in the summertime when food is more abundant and growing out in the wild. So, yeah, I can definitely see that happening.
Right. Just real quick, since we're talking on different like diet, this would be an interesting bring up too, which I believe was part of your Adirondack chapter. Jason, correct me again. Maybe I'm getting it confused with either the Adirondack or the Kinderhook creature chapter that you have. So forgive me, but you were talking about how somebody left out, I think it was pizza one time and a hot dog and a raw steak or something like that, or maybe just would step on occasion. But either way, the hot dog were not touched. I believe the pizza wasn't really touched, but however, the raw steak was taken, which I think you were kind of trying to say, like, or any type of red meat for that matter, was taken versus like hot dog or pizza. So, would that be because maybe for pizza, for this example, is that because maybe there's cheese on it, or some like it's more carbs, so it's like bread, whereas they're mainly looking for like that protein, that steak. And I don't really know how I could go about the hot dog aspect, except for it's just not what it's looking for as far as the carbohydrate or the protein.
Yeah, that was up in the Adirondacks. There was an incident in the Kinderhook area where an elderly lady, the person that was experiencing was the relatives of Bruce Maccabee. His mother and grandmother once left a trash bag out, and the next day, the trash bag they found, one of them was up in the air, the empty bag. One of them, the bag, something came across and just neatly untied the knot that was in the bag to get to the bag. And some of the contents that were in the trash were just old chicken bones. So apparently it smelled food from coming from the bag. Now the other incident was further up north into the Adirondacks, where the steak incident, where someone took the steak. Something similar happened to me in an area just west of Lake George, and I tried this little experiment alone based on that particular story. Is that I bought some McDonald's food. I bought some fries and a burger from McDonald's. I didn't plan on eating that garbage. I just wanted to leave it out and into the woods and see who or what took the bait. I had a trail cam mounted further away, and this is the weird thing that happened. Is that a couple of days I went back and the burger was gone, but something left the fries. And in place of the burger was a rock left right on a tree stump, right where the burger was. And I said, oh boy, I bet you my trail cam caught that. I looked over and the trail cam was on the ground. And whoever or whatever did this, because I'm not quite sure, someone came up or something came up and neatly untied the belt that was keeping the cam around the tree, untied the belt, causing it to fall to the ground. So, needless to say, I didn't get any photos as to who the culprit was, but if, let's assume, for argument's sake, that it could have been a Bigfoot that did something like this, obviously it was a lot more keen to what us humans are trying to pull, because they know they're being looked for. Now, as far as what they're picking, as far as being selective in their diet, I think they're going by their sense of smell, because their senses are a lot more keen to ours. It's similar to like if you hold out a piece of food to a dog and they sniff it first. If it doesn't jive with them, well, they're not going to eat it. But if it's a piece of steak, well, that's something that all animals are going to eat, because instinctively, well, that's food coming from nature. But if there's any kind of processed chemicals in there, I seem to think that they might be able to detect that with their keen sense of smell. And they said, well, I'm not eating that crap. So I think that's what's happening. They know what's good, and they know what is probably not too safe for consumption.
Right, and I will just quickly shine on and say I completely agree with that. If any animal will sniff something and they don't eat it, that's a good indication that there's something wrong with it, and maybe you shouldn't eat it.
Yeah, exactly. If they don't want it, if they won't eat it, then you shouldn't either.
Exactly. Yeah, I just love that story, and the way I think you were telling that to me when I actually met up with you again this past Whitehall Fest anyway, and I think you were telling me about that story with again, it's bizarre. And it's fascinating to me because, like you just said, the fact that if it is, for the sake of the argument here, if it was a Bigfoot that untied this, man, dude, I mean, how much more can we say? Like, how much longer can we say we cannot outsmart these things? And now with that, it's just like it just goes to prove the point. Like, how is it learning? Is it just sneaking up behind it, and then, or is it watching you maybe from a far distance to see how you put it on, and therefore, trying to learn, like, oh, well, he did it this way. Maybe if I just, pulled right here, maybe it'll just fall. Like, that's what just brings up more questions now to me to kind of figure out, like, man, are we just being watched nonstop and not realizing it?
Yeah, and there's so many different variables to that theory. It can spin off into so many different directions, and there's really no way of knowing for sure.
No.
Other than the fact that that's their area. That's like walking into someone else's living room and think that you're going to put a hidden camera in someone else's room and think that they're not going to know about it,
Yeah.
Hey,
True.
that wasn't there. Yeah, that wasn't there before.
Yeah, who put that there?
Well, I mean, one thing you have to think about, honestly, and I think it's something I think that we have a hard time grasping, which is just that for the difference in how careful they have to be, and how and the stakes for them versus the stakes for us, and us when we're going out either not at all looking for these things or specifically searching for them. If we fail or if we make a mistake, or if we, there's no like for them, this could be extinction of a species, right? It could be, this is something, they're obviously smart enough and clever enough to have evaded detection for this long in order to, I think they're well aware of what kind of trouble we bring to the discovery of anything. So you have to imagine that if they make a mistake, if they screw up, if they walk in front of a trail camera or like or get spotted, that could be total extinction. For us, it's like, oh, we may not see something that we were trying to see. We made a mistake. We didn't catch the picture in time, or we didn't get, like, those are our stakes, but their stakes are genuinely greater. And so, they have to be out. They have to be also heavily skeptical of things. So, when it gets into certain things like processed meats or, again, I think you probably have a variance in discipline and skepticism with these things where, they may go, all right, this doesn't seem to be this meat right here doesn't seem to be as treated or as messed with, and this one might smell okay, or I might be interested in trying it, but I don't know if I trust it because of what what's there. And so, yeah, it's very interesting because you do have stories of other ones that and certainly in areas that are, you hear about more habituation scenarios where things kind of get a little closer and they start taking gifts and they start, I think it's interesting, or letting their guard down a little bit more. I think it's an interesting, I guess, variance between all of that stuff, because you don't really, I don't think you don't really ever appreciate what has kept these things hidden for so long. Or if these things are to exist, then they have to have a certain level of intelligence and a tactical sort of approach to how they deal with people in general, right? And how close they get. And so, go ahead.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, you're right about that, is that these have a highly intelligent, I think they are slowly evolving over time, too. I think the creatures of today are probably not the same as they were, say, 10,000 years rather ago, because, again, we learn things, we evolve as time goes on, and I think that everything that they do has to be very calculated and thought out, because every decision they make is essential to their survival, and one small mistake they make could lead to their capture. And there's a reason why they've gone elusive and they've evaded mankind for hundreds of years, because they're actively avoiding mankind. They know how dangerous we are to them. They know that we have firearms, so they have to avoid humans from time to time. But however, sometimes they do let their guard down. They do make mistakes just like we do, and that's when people see them and they encounter them. And I'm very often weary of people that say they have an interaction where one of them comes to visit them and they have some sort of, bond or relationship. I tend to not believe that as often, because the majority of the reports that I get are the creature spots the human, the creature leaves the area, or the creature will try and do some sort of bluff charge through rock throwing or vocalizations to scare that person out of the area. Either two scenarios is a clear indication that they don't really jive well with humans.
Right. Yeah, I agree. And I also think there's probably an element of potentially, and this is something that I don't know this for sure, but this is something I've gathered from actually going back to these specific researchers I was talking about, because they had a certain area that they were going to all the time, and they would have these things happening, but they weren't. It's not like they were having it's not like they were talking to them or exchanging. They would just have these incidents happening quite frequently. And what I started to think it could be, because it seemed like these were a lot of juvenile interactions in terms of some of the prints that they were getting and some of the thermal things that they were getting, is that it could be some training opportunities as well. I mean, if you have a family group and you have younger ones, and they who have to learn how to learn how to stay out of sight and how to I guess if you're talking about two or three and one needs to distract them in a certain dangerous situation, one needs to be able to distract the person or people in the area so the other one can make their way out of, if they're sort of trapped in an area where they could get caught. You have an opportunity where under certain safer circumstances, you could begin guiding and teaching and training younger ones how to stay undetected. And so that what the experiences these two people would have, and I find them highly credible. I've been actually out into the field with them. Is they would have certain things like rocks that would consistently be thrown at their tents when they were going in. They would find tracks when they had certain creeks and that would, once the water would so that, in other words, these things would walk through the water and collect oysters, I think it was, and when the water would recede, they'd find the tracks of them. And they had a lot of other interesting. They had a lot of very compelling thermal, like where they see head and shoulders popping up over certain clearings, but they were never getting, and they were never getting. It was interesting how these interactions would happen. They had certain areas where they would put things in certain jars, hide them behind rocks, underneath rocks, and they'd put candy bars and things that would then go. Something would have to move the rocks, go and unscrew the jar, take out the thing, and they would find the wrappers later. Things like that. But it was very interesting. And they would also, one of the other very interesting things was the tracks they were collecting, the sort of rate at which these tracks were growing every year. Because you could see they were the same feet. And they would grow. And they were already fairly large and interesting looking, but just the rate at which they would grow. And they also found tracks that were much bigger for larger ones, but they would more consistently find the juvenile ones. and in winter and in very cold times as well. So it was very interesting. But it does seem like there could be that other extra element of having to teach how to, younger ones how to remain stealthy and concealed in dangerous situations.
Yeah, and I would imagine that their elders would teach their offsprings certain ways of life and survival when you're living in the woods. However, I think all the activities that you mentioned, the rock throwing, sometimes the peeking into people's cabin windows, and the running out in front of cars, these are all of the things that we did as juvenile boys when we were teenagers. We did everything our parents told us not to do. So I think what we're experiencing here is that these are teenage juveniles, like you just mentioned, and I think that they just tend to be a little bit more bold and daring in their younger years because they don't know any better. Once they get older, once they experience things, and once they learn for themselves and their testosterone calm down a little bit, I think they come to their senses, whereas you need to stay away from these humans because they're bad news. And
right.
The whole leaving the food out, I don't know if I'd leave candy bars underneath a rock as means of bait, because the bugs will always get there before anything else does. So you have that small window of time.
These would be contained. What they were leaving out they were in wrappers, and then they were in containers. So they were in the wrappers. They were put in a container that was closed, and the container was hidden behind the rocks. So there's multiple layers of
Yeah, you're trying to get fingerprints. Then you're trying to get the fingerprints on the jar there.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
And you mentioned the footprints seem to grow slightly larger each year, indicating that this is probably a young adult still growing into puberty, I would imagine.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Now, my question to those researchers is, how do they know that's the same individual? I mean, do they mark it and measure the footprints down to? I mean, there's a lot of different variables to that. I mean, it could be other individuals in that area. I mean, we just don't know.
Yeah. I mean, they get some pretty compelling casts that you get a lot of detail in. So I think what they were going off of is certain things in some of the cast scenes that they got. It could be something in the shape of a certain toe, or the shape of a certain, maybe some kind of disfigurement or some kind of scar. I'm not I'm not a expert in tracks. One of them was working with a biologist and a footprint expert, and they would get into a lot of detail in some of the examination of these tracks and prints that they were taking. So, but outside of that, I don't want to speculate too much. But it's the same way. I know I actually got the chance to meet with Dr. Meldrum a couple weeks just before he passed away, and he would talk about certain tracks that they would find in the same area, in Washington, and they even think they had found Patty's tracks from other people around, within years of when that film was taken. But I know, especially he was talking about in I think he was talking about Paul Freeman had found some tracks, and then another woman, generally in the same area as him, had found a track that he was certain was the same individual. It was not. The two people didn't know each other, and they had never seen each other's tracks. And he had gotten copies of both tracks, and he was positive it was the same individual. And he's like, this is another verifying thing, that two people who don't know each other at different times getting the same track of the same individual, that he could verify as being the same individual. And took that as a very compelling evidence for that the existence of that individual. Yeah.
So what you're saying is the two individuals got together and they compared the casts, and I assume that measured the dimensions of the foot and the toe dimensions and the spacing and everything, and found that this was one of the same creatures, or these two casts were from the identical creature that made those two footprints. Yeah. I mean,
for him it was they didn't even get together. They both sent the tracks to him because he was the guy in the area who was doing this, and he was the one that verified they were the same individual. So they didn't even know each other, the two individuals who got it. But that which made it even more, interesting. It's not like they could have gotten together and compared and go, okay, well, here, you gave me the same thing that you used to make this. He's saying these guys didn't, he had collected one of the tracks from one of them, and then got sent another track from another person who was interested in finding out if this track that they found was authentic, and he already had the other track in his collection and was able to compare them and say, oh, these are the same individual. And it wasn't like they were the exact, so they had the same identifying features. There was either something very specific about it. It might have been a scar. It might have been a certain broken bone or disfigurement in it. But he was able to see, but specifically he could see, like, oh, okay, in this one, it's, even if this was, he could see that there was articulation in the foot that meant that this could not even be, like, you couldn't make this out of a some kind of wooden stamp or some kind of mold or something because the foot is even articulated a little differently, but you can see the same identifying features in both tracks. So it's very interesting. And he actually showed, he pulled the tracks out, and it was interesting to see that. But yeah, so that was, that to me is one of the, I can actually find that story and send that to you guys because it's a very interesting, he talks about it a lot. He's talked about it before. But it's
just a real quick question, Alan. Just I don't know if you know the answer or not, or if Jeff mentioned it maybe to you. But between the track, did he say like how far apart? And what I mean by that is like were there a couple months, couple weeks, couple days,
couple years? It was like within year. It was like within 5 years, in the same general vicinity. So these two people, the two people lived, not far from each other. They were in the same area, and it was within about 5 years.
That's pretty good.
It was very interesting. And he could see that.
Yeah. I mean, that right there, that two people that didn't know each other got the same footprint cast. That kind of solidifies the accusation that there is something that's migrating through that area.
Exactly.
Right. Exactly, and that was his point. Was just that he, it was just of all the ways that he goes, there is no way this could be hoaxed, right? And he has a laundry list of reasons, as an expert, or had. I'm sorry to say, but he that was one of the main, that's one of the big things on there was like, I have seen prints of the that I can verify are the same individual that were taken by two different people, in the general same area, in the general same time frame, in a decent time frame, not like super decades apart, but and that and that he had in his collection. So that to him was a major smoking gun.
And that's what he was good at. And that's exactly what he was good at. And I just want to say real quick, but, this reminds me of, off to a different topic for a minute, but Shark Week. They were talking about this one particular team that goes out to tag these sharks. They gave these shark specific name, but one shark that they can identify right off the back is the scars on the fins and by the shark's gill. That's how they know they can identify, like, this is, for the example, this is like Bob, we'll just say for the example, whereas the other one might be like Samantha or something. But like, and what you were saying is, if Jeff was able to say, hey, this track looks like this track, and pulled it out and say, hey, this matches, that almost kind of reminds me of that. It's like that, finding that shark again with that type of marking and say, oh, this is Bob or this is Samantha. That's how you're going to know where that shark traveled. And we can even say, for the example, like maybe let's just say Bob started off at the specific ocean water, and then for some weird reason, let's just say Bob was seen again in, like, let's just say, not Cape Cod. Well, yeah, we could say Cape Cod or even Maine. And then if we can identify that shark had these specific scars, we could say, oh yeah, that's Bob. It's just that just goes to show, though.
Yeah, no, exactly. And it shows that, you couldn't coincidentally, people who I think oversimplify the possibility of creating, hoaxing these tracks. It proves you couldn't accidentally or coincidentally just, make the same foot that was already. You can't just accidentally do that. The chances of something like that happening are almost impossible. And actually, interestingly enough, one of the other very interesting things that Meldrum spoke about was that before he ever published anything about the mid-tarsal break, and before there were any public photographs of it, because when they took pictures of the Patterson-Gimlin footprints and a lot of the prints that had been published, they were taken with old, like they were printed in ways where it overexposed everything, and it just kind of blew out any detail in that curvature that you see in what he was calling the mid-tarsal break, right? So before he had ever published his book about it, and before anybody had ever seen actual other evidence of it, he traveled to China to meet with somebody who had collected these prints, and this individual would have had no way of seeing what looked like, that sort of famous footprint where you can actually see the curve, that divot in the where the mid-tarsal break is. And as soon as so he was able to look at the prints that this individual took in China, who would have had no idea about that, and it was again, it was a perfect match for that aspect of the foot. And that was another thing for him that was just like, this cannot be hoaxed. You can't do that. So I'll find that story for you guys as well, because I think it's tremendously interesting. Again, that's just more of a feature of the foot that he was talking about, not obviously the same individual, but it's another aspect of the whole phenomenon, because how does somebody just sort of, come up with this, this thing that, that on their own that already exists somewhere else and hasn't been published yet.
I think I know that story, but because I think the guy that you're trying to think about from Japan, he only thought it was around just in Japan. He didn't think it was outside of Japan. And then since he saw that it was not just in Japan but elsewhere, I think that kind of shocked him too, to the point where it's just like, oh wow, like it kind of opened up more of like what else could this be, I think that's the one I'm thinking of.
Yeah, that would make sense, because and as far as the whole skeptic mindset of people thinking that all of these are hoax, you look at the logic and behind this is that when someone comes forth with a cast, if you're going to assume that cast was a hoax even back then, and you look at the mid-tarsal break, I mean, if you were to hoax a cast, why would you put a mid-tarsal break in a cast when you know nothing about the subject? It just doesn't make sense. So there has to be something there that's worth examining. And the fact that people say all these casts are fake is just simply not true.
Right. I mean, it's laughable. Again, I was lucky enough to go see his lab and see his footprints, and this just, I mean, number one, you can't argue with the man's expertise. He's clearly was not a grifter or charlatan. He wasn't somebody who doesn't know anything about what he's talking about, or just making up the science as he goes. But so once you get there and you see, I mean, the collection's so impressive, and his knowledge on the subject and his ability to see, like he can look at what we might look at as a bad print, or as a like that's kind of a, you can't see the full foot in this, or it looks like, and he can see a whole story behind how the foot slid, how it stepped, it stepped here, and then it slid, and then the toes gripped here, and he can look at all of that and show you and it's fascinating. It's just fascinating stuff. It's again, similar story even to his whole Paul Freeman story, where he went out with Paul Freeman and they just found a bunch of prints, that morning. And he thought, okay, this guy's really good at this. I don't know how he's doing it, but he's hoaxing me somehow. And then he went back after he left with Paul Freeman, then went back himself to go cast things and found, something like a whole other trackway that led to this one that Paul Freeman didn't even know about or see, and couldn't, and if this guy was hoaxing him, why would he just walk away from some of the most compelling prints, and expect Jeff Meldrum to go back on his own later and sneak there and try to, it's just people don't actually take the time to learn these stories properly and learn what was actually going on. It's much easier to just go, it's fake. I'm going to remain in my own little bubble of, I'm much safer here. I'm much safer in here where I know everything. Go ahead.
You're right. And we get that all the time with the general public. Is their go-to place or their knee-jerk reaction is, oh, it must be fake, when these people really don't take the time to look into the evidence and examine every little key element and every feature in it, like Mr. Meldrum did. He understands the science behind all of this stuff, so he examines everything, like you said, the way the foot slides into the mud, or with the way the toes grip the dirt, and all these tiny little details, which to most people would be small, but as a researcher, that's huge. And those little things add up to a story where you say, all right, something walked through here, something legit, and it wasn't a person. This was a different species that we haven't quite fully understood just yet. And yet the general public is mocking us and laughing at us, saying that we're just a bunch of airy-fairy people that just believe in a whole woo-woo camp of these things that just don't exist, which is just simply not true. If they took the time to examine the evidence, they might understand a little bit that there is something more to it that's going on here.
100% agree. 100% agree. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll just shine into about Jeff Meldrum, which is, I watched one of his old videos and for like teaching, and one of the things that really caught my eye about him was like one of the students who was like skeptical, and he was trying to look at the print that was there, but he didn't know about it. He didn't have that proper eye trained like me. Like if somebody showed me a footprint, if it's not very well cast, I'm gonna have that trouble to identify what I'm supposed to be looking at, because again, I just don't have that trained eye. Whereas Jeff Meldrum, I think what I loved about him is that he would just jump right in to basically say like, look, this is how you read the footprint. This is where the mid-tarsal is. This is that, like you guys were saying. Like, this is, like, if it slid in the mud, like, that's what I think that the field is lacking now that Jeff Meldrum is down and gone, unfortunately, which is we need somebody else to take over, because pretty soon all that knowledge that Jeff did know is now gone. But like you guys get what I'm saying? Like pretty soon we need to like have somebody basically write down Jeff Meldrum's video and basically have it down, so that way when we can find the next Jeff Meldrum, which obviously we all know he's irreplaceable, but we need at least some type of, maybe I'll just say footprint guide per se, to basically go back to like his notes to say like, well, this is what we know from Jeff Meldrum, and stuff like that, and then maybe continue on of what he was trying to fulfill of the research. But I think that's just one thing that I just loved about him, is he wasn't afraid to just jump in and teach the person like, hey, this is how you read that footprint.
Yeah, and Meldrum may be gone, but all of his work and research is still documented and saved. But the only thing that we're missing is someone that's willing to pick up the torch and carry on his research and continue on from there. And so far, And I think it's too soon to tell, but so far nobody's been able to do that just yet. But I'm hoping, and we're all hoping, that someone will step up to the plate and carry on his legacy.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, he would talk about that there are people, he does have colleagues and students and people who did and have and are, are doing this work. But again, the issue is also that, they don't necessarily feel safe to come out and be public about it, and they're afraid of being ostracized. They're afraid of losing,
the reputation.
losing respect.
The reputation.
Exactly.
Goes right back to that again. And Jeff didn't care about it. That's why he came out about it. So,
right. Jeff was a successful person as it was before that, so he didn't really care too much about reputation because he had his credentials backing him. So, as far as like the people that are green and the newbies, they're kind of a little bit squeamish. I can understand why they don't want to step up to plate just yet. But I think he must have saw this coming ahead of time because he must have foreseen that, hey, someday I'm not going to be here anymore, so who's going to take my place,
Yeah. Mm-hmm. No, he talked about it. He talked about it often in the last couple of years. So I think he was aware. And it's definitely sad to see him go. And I think most. I think one of his whole attitude about it was, it doesn't really matter what whether or not this hurts me reputationally. This is the science. I'm following the science, and this is the science, and I can stand. I can stand confidently behind it because I've done the work, and I can see, and I'm showing my work, and I can show you how I've come to these conclusions. And this isn't a matter of like stepping out on a ledge and taking a leap of faith. This is a matter of following the science and standing firmly behind the work that I've done. And he was, I think again, the hard part is it's not as evident to us because we don't have that expert eye that he did, or I guess maybe the layman, to look at something and go, okay, sometimes you can watch you can watch a video of something and you can hear an expert talking about what you're seeing. And you can watch it one time and you don't see everything that's happening in this video. It could be a sport video. It could be anything, right? You might not know about the sport, or you might not know a boxing match or whatever. You don't exactly know what's happening. And then you watch it again and you're hearing an expert tell you what they're seeing when they're watching this, and you can suddenly start to see it a little bit better. And you don't always see it clearly, but you see it a little bit better about what they're talking about, what they're saying, or what the methodology or what the expertise is behind what you're watching. And that's why some of those breakdown things get so popular, because getting to see what the expert eye sees in some of that stuff. And it would be great to see people start to pick up the mantle, though, like you said, and well, we can only hope, right? I think, because the science is, the phenomena is there, the science is real, and you have to expect that somebody will do that. Somebody will follow the science and do the same. It's just, I guess it's a matter of the timing and the I guess the platform to do it, right?
Yeah, and you mentioned that he does have colleagues, so hopefully one of them will step up and carry on his legacy and his work from there. But again, I think it's a little too soon to wait for that. I think maybe by next year we might see some researchers slowly starting to emerge into the general public eye and saying, hey, this is what we're doing, this is what we found, and we're carrying on the work of Mr. Meldrum here. So I'm anxious to see as to who these people are, because the work has to continue. You can't just throw everything into the trash and say, well, so much for that,
Right, exactly. And Meldrum was picking up, again, when he took over, was sort of picking up the mantle from what was his name?
Grover Krantz.
Yeah, Grover Krantz, that's it. So hopefully there'll be there's a young, brilliant scientific mind who's on course to do the same.
And that's what we're hoping with when we do these festivals, that we're hoping that when these little kids come to our tables and our festivals, we're hoping that this new generation of people will actually grow up and take an interest in the field, and maybe they'll start making some research, and maybe they'll start doing some discoveries that no one has ever discovered before. But
Right.
Exactly.
So eventually our time will come, but we need to carry on the work of the younger generation. So in order to keep this work coming, in order for us to make the discoveries, so that's something I'm looking forward to.
I hear that.
Excellent.
I guess real quick before we kind of wrap things up, coming up on the hour and stuff. One other thing I'm just curious about, Jason, is in the book you're talking about the little town of Kinderhook, and one of the aspects that I kind of was liking about was the white blob aspect, I guess you could say. I guess in your own, maybe I'll just say this for the sake of the question, in your own opinion, maybe, how often rare would you say that people actually come across an albino Bigfoot? Basically, that's basically what I would call it anyway. I'm just curious because most of the time you hear like a brown cinnamon color, so it makes me wonder why Kinderhook would have almost like the white blob.
That one is the DNA of the individuals. As to humans, we have people that have different shades of colors in their hair color, but the most color that we get are between brown, dark brown, and black. As far as an albino, I think that's as rare as it is with us humans on this earth, but although it does seem to happen, and we don't get that very often. So as far as the white blob, I wasn't there to experience it. I can only pass on the story of what someone else had claimed to have seen. That is very interesting, because every once in a while we get reports of orbs and different colors, like geoplasmic orbs that have been seen floating around in the area at the same time of a Sasquatch sighting. So is there a connection? I seem to think there is, because I really don't believe in coincidence in this world. I think everything happens for a reason. But I think in the case of Kinderhook, there was something known as an albino in that area. So again, we don't get that very often, but it is a interesting note to observe.
Right. Well, I just bring it up just because normally, well, okay, so this is just going my own opinion, and that is usually if I hear like a white Bigfoot, usually I would think that's more like, international, maybe Russia per se, something that's more white mountains or more snowy area mainly. That's where I would feel like what would you consider that, like a Yowie maybe, or maybe a Yeti per se? I might be getting it wrong with the different international terms, but there are just so many to keep track of where goes what. But a Yowie, I think, is Australia. Yeti might be elsewhere for all I know. I can't remember. But the point is, go ahead.
Let's just say that the Yeti was out in the Himalayas. They referred to it as the abominable snowman, which is up in the Tibetan mountains. They call it the abominable snowman because the stench of this creature was so abominable they couldn't stand being around it, and they always knew when it was around by the sense of smell. However, it was never reported as being white. It was either a brown or dark brown in color. Now, if we take a trip into Australia, they're known as the Yowie, or the Skookum rather. The Yowie was a Chinese term for them, and yet they were more described as having more ape-like features, whereas here in the U.S. they tend to be more human-like in appearance, which tells me that there's different species of these creatures all across the world, which is a very interesting observation.
Yeah, and which would make sense too, because we have so much evidence of us overlapping different hominids and hominoids, right? We have so much. We overlapped such a much larger group than we ever thought that we did. With evidence of them existing as recently as I don't know. I think they said something. I think what I heard recently was like 10,000 years ago or something, like something, much later than we originally thought. Yeah, you would imagine that, we didn't just kill everything off. So, the original thought was that we evolved from these things and could never have overlapped them, but we know that's not true. And so you get into Australopithecine and Homo naledi and all the other, I mean, there's so many, and they're still being discovered. So it's, you would imagine with the record that we have of different upright walking, non-human apes, primates, that, you're going to get variance in the type of creatures that are out there, but that are all similar or related in some way.
Yeah, and location and climate is very key to how they will evolve into their area, because every creature on this planet has eventually started to evolve into it and starts to adapt to its environmental setting. So that would make sense, yes.
Right, exactly. But yeah, I have heard a lot of, just going back to what you were asking, I've heard a lot of, I mean, I wouldn't say a lot, but you hear there's a number of reportings of albino sightings, and I think just like you said, it's going to be that same kind of one in every however many, right? There are albino bears, there are albino animals, albino cats and dogs, and it happens. Yeah, I think that's a good possibility. You hear all the time about how when they move, they glide. That's something that could be happening, that where things look like they're floating because they don't really bounce up and down when they're walking. You don't know if the bottom portion of the feet or legs could have gotten muddy or dirty and harder to see through foliage, and you just sort of see this sort of white thing kind of moving through it smoothly, and it could look like that. That's certainly a possibility, I would think, but who knows?
Right. And to touch on what you were saying, Alan, about the whole they don't bob up and down, that's like the question, well, then how are they able to almost look like they're just floating? Is it because of the way their feet are? Like, and what I mean by that is we were talking about the mid-tarsal break, whereas us humans, we have the arch. But is that just because their pattern makes it so that's why they don't bob up and down, whereas our arch is making it so that we bob up and down because of our feet? If that makes any sense. But one thing...
Yeah, I think I can answer that one.
Right. I just wanted to... Well, just one thing real quick, Jason, sorry. So on top of that, though, the one thing that I just want to also just throw out there, and then you guys can take over, is what is also interesting to me when we start talking about these mountain giants is one part in your book, Jason, which is evident. There's one that talked about a skeleton was dug up to be 7 feet tall, which was in Tennessee. And then there's another one where it talked about the bones of people that were over 8 feet tall and like 8.5 to 10 feet, which was also somewhere. I think it was like a mummy. I'm trying to find it. California. There we go. So what I'm trying to get at real quick with this, though, is so back in human days, like century, maybe 19th century, I'll just say, as we know, we were smaller back then, which is why, like, when you go, and this is an example I can give, which is like the House of Seven Gables. When you first walk in through that first door for the tour, the ceiling is so low, but that was basically because we were short back then. And I guess what I'm trying to get at is as us humans were evolving, we became taller. The one thing that I'm just wondering now is, and Alan, you can answer it, Jason, you can too, is, we keep hearing, though, that these mountain giants or even these Sasquatch today, they still seem to be sticking around the 7 feet to 10 feet tall. We don't hear, at least to my knowledge, you guys can correct me, obviously, but it's not like we hear anything about one being 14 feet tall or even taller than 14 feet, unless you guys have. And that's all I want to say.
Back in the 1800s, we were a lot shorter, but I think the average man was about 5.5 feet tall. I think diet played a lot of key role in that. But as far as these hairy hominids, I think these are obviously a different species of human. They're not the same, so their genetics will determine as to how tall they will get to be. Now, as far as the way they walk, like you were just describing earlier, how they kind of lack that bobbing of the head the humans have, we don't walk the same way they do. See, when a human walks, we throw out one leg and we walk from heel to toe, and that launches us forward, and then our back leg will actually project forward, and we have this continuous cycle where we're continuously bouncing, whereas these creatures, their skeletal structure is slightly different from ours. That's why it's always, for me, one of the key things when I see a picture or a video of an alleged Bigfoot, the first place I look is the arms, because their arm length is always going to be longer than a human from shoulder to elbow, which for us humans, our arms will hang down about halfway in our thighs, where these creatures have been described where their arms hang, their hands hang right down to knee level, which means their arms are a little bit longer. Now their legs have a slightly different variance in their bone morphology, where they don't lock out their knees the way humans do. They keep their knees bent roughly at a 45 to 26 degree angle at all times. So they also walk with an inline stride, which is 1 foot in front of the other, where people tend to walk more pigeon-toed. And that's because we are not designed anatomically the same way they are. So that means that they're going to have a slight different variance in the way they walk. So they will not have that bobbing of the head, whereas they will have more of like what people describe as a cross-country skiing look, where they're simply just gliding across the woods, and it has a very elegant look, and that's because their skeletal structure is designed in a specific way. They have to walk in a specific way, which is slightly different from ours. Now, as far as the height of humans, I think our diet that we've been changing throughout the years. People will get slightly taller. People will, have, environmental factors that they will have to adapt to, and there's a lot of determining factors and variables as to why people are getting taller these days. But I think what it all boils down to is just environmental and diet practice that we have happened all over the years.
Yeah, agreed. And we also don't really have a very scientific study on mapping their, it'd be much harder for us to determine whether or not their sizes are changing over the course of time and how they've adapted. And you wouldn't exactly be able to do that, but what you can do is also look at the fossils of what appear to be their ancestors definitely were shorter. Like those have gotten bigger as well, and that would also, I think, as Jason said, that as these things may have been forced towards more rugged and areas where you have to be able to climb more and navigate through much more difficult terrain. The size of your body is going to have to adapt to survive in those spaces. So, but it would be very difficult for us to know again how that's shifting and changing. They're just always going to look, especially even because even the eyewitness accounts, you don't have an actual scientific measurement of, it's about 7 to 8 feet, or looked like it was 7 to 9 feet or 8 to 9. Like you don't exactly know. It just looked big. Things look big and bigger than us and significantly bigger than us. But how big? It's hard to. You don't know exact numbers. So
you're right. And I just want to shine in real quick because I just looked up. So the tallest human ever recorded, and I'm probably going to butcher his last name, unfortunately, but I want to say it's Robert Wadlow, Wadlow. This man was, what was it? 8 feet, 11.1 inches tall. And by the time he died, he was 439 pounds by the time of his death. And he died at the age of 22 years old because of a poorly fitting leg brace that was irritated in his ankle that caused an infection.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I've heard of people like that. I think there was some guy in China that actually topped that record of being almost 10 feet in height. But now, if you look at these people, they're abnormally tall. They look like they're stretched out into the fact where they don't have the shoulder width that's proportioned to their height. They don't have everything else, and that's mainly because they have what we nickname the term gigantism, which is it's a hormone imbalance in the brain's pituitary gland where you just keep producing more and more growth hormones. Even though your genes has determined how tall you should be between 5 foot something to 6 foot, so you have that range or window, if you will, that your genes say you should be this height, whereas you have a birth defect that your body is just producing more and more growth hormone. So what it's doing is it's essentially stretching you out. Your bones are not as strong as they would be because they're now weaker and less dense, and you're going to have organ problems because your organs are being stretched out internally, and you're going to have knee problems and problems walking, so that would make perfectly sense. Now, in comparison to these creatures that are 9, 10 feet in height, they are genetically, anatomically supposed to be that height because that's what their genes told them to be. So when people try and use that as a comparison as to where these things could not be that tall because they would have these health problems, is simply just not true. You're talking about a completely different species of human.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, all right. Well, 100%. Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah, I agree with you, Alan. Alan, is there anything that you wanted to ask Jason before we wrap up, or are you all set, buddy?
No, I think it was great. It was a great conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time, and it's great day. I'm very excited to read the book and look forward to more of your research.
Yeah, speaking of research, Jason, before we let you go, what are you working on currently that we could expect for you in the future? Because I'd love to have you back on anyway.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I'm working on a third book. I think I'm more going to focus on the Dogman subject. If I do write a third book on Bigfoot, I haven't really decided as to what area to focus on. I might do Vermont. I might do New York again. I'm not quite sure just yet, but I have some other areas that I've been mapping out as far as research areas that I'm hoping to get into sometime by next year, because again, these are seasonal migration areas. To visit these areas out of their seasonal reports, you just might, for me, it's pointless. So those are the things I'm looking forward to as far as next year.
Perfect, man. Well, I would love to have you back on maybe before February 6th, because I just found out yesterday, actually, when I was trying to prepare for National Sasquatch Day, that I just found out that there is a day dedicated as National Werewolf Day. So I would love to maybe have you back on so we can talk Dogman for February 6th, if that's possible.
I wasn't aware of that holiday, but we could definitely do that.
Yeah, I wasn't either. So it's down for that too, Alan. I'd love to invite you back on to chat about that as well.
Sounds great. Sounds exciting.
All right, well, let's make that happen. I guess let's keep in contact and everything else about this holiday then. So, but
Absolutely.
so Jason, again, thank you for your time, and I would ask you if there's any way for people to keep up with you, but I know currently you don't really have social media, so I guess what is the best way for if anybody wanted to reach out prior, I guess, like email or something?
Yeah, it's the best way to reach out to me. We Vermont Sasquatch at VermontSquatchWatch at yahoo.com. It's all one word, just Vermont Squatchwatch, and it's spelled just the way it sounds. And it's at
So it's not like,
yahoo.com.
I just wanted to make sure too, Jason, like Vermont is actually spelled out. It's not like VT.
Right, it's the full word.
Okay. Well, for listeners too, I will have the email address dropped in the description of the episode too, if you guys would like to reach out to Jason. So hope. So hope.
Hi, my name is Anthony Scalzo. I am from the research team Finding Dystopia. Now, how we got our start into Sasquatch research is kind of a funny story. We were invited to do a presentation at the Ticonderoga Historical Society because we actually did an investigation there and we wanted to present to the public some of the things we found. Now, we actually ran into Sue Gosselin, Brian Gosselin's wife. Now, some of you might be familiar with Mr. Gosselin's story, but if you're not, quick refresher, he had an encounter with Bigfoot in Whitehall, New York in the late 70s. He was around my age at the time, and he was a police officer. He was off duty at the time, but there had been a string of sightings involving state police and locals, and he went to the area to go check it out, and he saw the creature. Now, since then, we have been doing regular field investigations with Brian, and we found some pieces of evidence, tree twists, casts, stuff like that. What do I hope our team can bring for the future is credible evidence, A lot of the things like footprint cast, tree twists, like all these things are considered circumstantial, and eyewitness testimonies can often be seen sometimes as unreliable, at least in the context of the criminal justice system. That's what my degree is in. I took criminal investigation, so I try to use that approach towards our research. Ultimately, I think that Bigfoot will never really be proven until there is a specimen found. Unfortunately, it will probably have to be dead. But until then, things like DNA evidence and stuff like that can only say, hey, we do not have this animal in our database yet, so we don't know what it is. So until we find an actual specimen, I don't think we will ever fully prove the existence of the creature. But what I hope we can do in the meantime is share our stories, share our findings, and influence the next generation to hopefully be putting a lot more time, research, energy, and money invested into finding what is really out there.
And there you have it, folks. That is the end for the National Sasquatch Day episode. I hope you've enjoyed. I want to first say thank you to those that helped with this episode. Dave, Jason, Alan, and of course Anthony from Finding Dystopia. And together, folks, we can learn.